Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Have a great day.
James Houck, Sr. He is from Timonium, Maryland. It's twice in a row I've gotten it. 2 out of the 4 ain't bad. The reason that this is such a monumental occasion is Jim is 90 years old, has not had a drink in 60 years, and did it the old-fashioned way. Yes. The old-fashioned way in the Oxford group. So he is coming to us this evening as a distinguished guest of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I know that I have created a lot of controversy myself traveling around the country as an archivist, and one of the controversies that is still raging everywhere I go is whether or not we can even consider this to be an AA meeting since we have a non-AA speaker. I want to assure you that our history goes back all the way to 1935 with non-AA members speaking at meetings. And it's also in the first group handbook as one of the 3 meeting formats, and it was called Distinguished Guests of Alcoholics Anonymous. In the conventions at 1955 and 1960, especially 1960, Bill Wilson had Sister Ignatia on the podium, who was not an alcoholic, Sam Shoemaker, who was not an alcoholic, and on. And his wife, Lois, who was not an alcoholic. And others, yeah, I'm sure there were. So this is an AA meeting, and we are having this format as a distinguished guest of AA as our speaker. Jim has also come with a wealth of information. He has brought, that we have included in the packets for the weekend, this How to Listen to God, this 4-page outline, which is one of the most concise pieces of work that I've ever seen on how to make the conscious contact with God and how to act on the guidance that you receive from that contact. Also, he's supplied me, and I've made copies of a early Oxford group pamphlet. This pamphlet could be the first Oxford group pamphlet in the early 1930s, How Do I Begin? And it also goes into guidance and how to take action based upon the guidance. Earlier this evening, James made a contribution to the Wilson House Library of 25 to 30 of the rarest Oxford group books that I've ever seen. In fact, 8 or 10 of those books I've never seen before. A couple I've heard of and have never physically laid eyes on them. And Jim has graciously donated them to the Wilson House archives. Yes. As I said, this is a special occasion indeed, and do want to introduce James Houck.
How we do this now? That's it. Is that close? Well, thanks, Wally. I guess 2 weeks ago or so, I didn't think I'd be here tonight, but I had Chris is instrumental in this, and she told Wally about my connection with the early Oxford group. And I get a call in from Tucson, and many calls, in fact, back and forth and this sort of thing. But tonight I'm reminded of I used to work for a company, and it was back in the days we were putting in retirement plans, and in order for these plans to be effective, every employee had to sign for them. And there was one old fellow by the name of Joe who said that he didn't understand the plan, and he'd never signed anything he didn't understand, so he wouldn't sign the plan. Well, his fellow employees worked on Joe, and the foreman and the department head, even the vice president came down to work on Joe. But Joe said no, he wouldn't sign because he didn't understand. So finally the big boss said, well, send Joe, I want to talk to him. So Joe went up, and he said, Joe, they told me that you won't sign the plan. He said, that's right. Never sign anything I don't understand. the boss said, well, Joe, let me explain it to you this way. You either sign for the plan or you're fired. So Joe took the plan, signed it, and handed it back. So the boss said, now, Joe, why didn't you do that before? He said, no one ever explained it exactly like that to me. So I don't know. Tonight I feel something like a mosquito in a nudist colony, not knowing exactly where to begin. But we're going to just do more over the weekend. So while I thought tonight we might just deal with personalities involved in some of the early days of the Oxford group. Now, sometimes it's difficult to project ourselves back into the early day, but let's go back to a time when there was no AA movement. There was no Al-Anon. There was nothing like this at all. The thing we had then was the Oxford group. That's all there was, the Oxford group. And that's what Bill Wilson came in contact with. It was the only thing up to that time that had ever changed Bill's life. He had a spiritual experience in his life, and out of that came the genesis of the AA movement. So I met Bill Wilson in 1935. I had met the Oxford group in 1934. And Bill Wilson was a stockbroker on the New York Stock Exchange, and I lived in Frederick, Maryland at that time. And Bill had friends over in Virginia, just across the Potomac River from us. And he used to come there for weekends to relax, and it was horse country, and he'd come down there with his friends and relax for the weekend. He heard we were having Oxford group meetings in the old Francis Scott Key Hotel in Frederick, so he would come over Saturday night for those meetings. And the thing I remember most about Bill, and maybe the most outstanding, well, it's any question it was, he was absolutely obsessed with the idea of giving to every drunk that he met the answer he had found in the Oxford group. And so the first thing he would always ask when he came in, are we going to have any drunks here tonight? And I said, well, Bill, I don't know. I said, there are some people that I guess that drink. I don't know if they're going to have it. Well, he said, if you do, I want to talk to them. I said, okay. So but you have to remember too, at that time, we were just coming out of a Prohibition days. You all don't know what was involved in that. But in 1918, while the men were away at the First World War, the women all got together and went to the polls, and they voted liquor out of the country. They voted Prohibition in. And that lasted from then until 1933. So there was no bars. There was no taverns you could go to. No public drinking places at all. It was illegal. It was just like drugs maybe today, is that if you wanted to drink, you had the opportunity to buy some rot gut stuff that was maybe made in the morning, and you drank in the afternoon or something. And there was a lot of bathtub gin. I used to go to the University of Maryland on the weekends, and we used to make I've seen almost a half a bathtub full of gin. They used to take alcohol and put juniper juice with it and a lot of orange juice. And that was it. It's only we didn't go blind, but that's what we drank in those days. If you wanted to have a party, the parties were always in private homes. You either went into someone's cellar or kitchen, pulled the blinds down, and that's where you had your party. Lots of homebrew made in those days. I became a master at making homebrew. I remember if you put too much yeast in the brew, he would blow the tops off of the bottles. And I remember it sounded like we were being bombarded one night when these tops came off and hit the bedroom floor. And then, of course, you lost all the content of the thing. But those were the conditions that we were drinking in those days. So when I met Bill, we were just coming out of that. And so then Bill kept coming down on weekends, and he didn't come regularly. He'd come at different times, and so I got to know him, I think, real well. And so then Bill, of course, was in contact with Sam Shoemaker in New York, and Sam was Bill's mentor, and he helped Bill a lot to find his way spiritually in the early day. And Sam he ran the Episcopal Church in New York. It was called Gramercy Park Episcopal Church. And he had a large Oxford group meeting there. I think they had 3 or 4 or 5 meetings a week, different groups there in the parish hall. And Bill was a part of this. And Bill got to the point where he wanted to just have meetings in the parish hall just for alcoholics. Of course, they said no, you couldn't do that, but Bill went ahead and had a couple anyhow. This is Bill. So they pulled rank on Bill and said that he couldn't have any more meetings there. And then he took the meetings out after that. So it was in this framework. I guess it was 1938. Bill went to Frank Bookman, and Frank Bookman was the initiator and the guiding light in the Oxford group. And of course, Sam was in everyone that was in the work was in the Oxford group. There's no AA program, so Bill went to Frank and said that he wanted to give full time. He thought to just dealing with alcoholics. And this has always been in Bill's mind. I can see that now. It was always that concept. He always wanted to deal with the alcoholic. So Frank said, Bill, he said, if that's the biggest thing you see for your life, go and do it. But he said, remember, we're dealing with alcoholic nations. In quotation, that means nations, people drunk with power, sex, materialism, and every other thing. He said, that is our mission in life, to change things. So in 1938, Bill, of course, in the meantime, was in touch with the Akron group. That's Dr. Bob and the other people involved there in the Oxford group. Now, I never met Dr. Bob. I never, or his wife Ann. I never met them, but I did meet several of the people involved. A fellow by the name of T. Henry Williams. Now, T. Henry Williams was a mechanical engineer, and he developed the machinery for retreading of automobile tires. And of course, in 1930, retreading tires was a big thing then. And of course, that put him in touch with fellows like Firestone and Cyberling and other tire, Henry Ford, and all that sort of that group of people. And so there was Bill and Dr. Bob used to meet in T. Henry's house, and they met in Henrietta Cyberling's home. She had an apartment there, and she was always holding meetings in her home. And so there was always a controversy developed where AA started. Henrietta Cyberling said it started in her apartment when Bill and Dr. Bob sat down to plan this thing. T. Henry Williams always maintained that it started in his living room, where he'd point to a spot on the floor. He said, Bill Wilson got down on his knees, gave his life to God at that point. He said, that's where it started. That's when it started. Well, regardless of when it started, where it started, it did start in Akron, and I don't think anyone can deny that it started in Akron. And so I lost track of Bill then. I elected to stay with Bookman in his work with the Oxford group. And in 1938, about the same time that Bill and Dr. Bob started the AA program, Frank Bookman was in Germany working with Hitler with the Oxford group. And you say, well, he didn't make much headway, but he made a lot of headway with some lieutenants and some of the support people of Hitler, which later came into play and had a great effect on reestablishing a relationship after the war between France and Germany. That's a whole other story, which I won't tell. But Bookman at that time was walking in the Black Forest one day, and the thought came to him that the next great movement in the world would be the moral and spiritual rearming of men and nations. And he began to share this thought with people. And then the nomenclature changed from the Oxford group to moral rearmament. Everyone was thinking in terms of military armaments, arming, rearming, and all this, but it was always in a material sense. It was always in a military sense, a war sense. But Bookman was talking about a moral and spiritual rearming of people and nations. And that's what he began to talk about. And in 1939, the movement of moral rearmament was launched, and the work with the Oxford group then became moral rearmament. And I elected to stay with that group because my problem wasn't I wasn't a compulsory drinker. I drank to have fun and be the life of the party and all that sort of thing. But many people drink from fear because they don't want to be antisocial or considered antisocial if they're offered a drink. And often people drink from the problems that are never solved in their life. So these problems continue to drive the person back to drink. So it's a constant thing. But I elected to stay with Bookman, and I've continued to do that. I was on the National Board of Directors until recently. I became 90, and I thought that was time for me to quit, and I quit. And no one got down on their knees and pleaded for me to stay on the board. So I thought the decision on that basis was good. So I lost track of Bill at that time, and so because I was giving my full support and everything to the moral rearmament. But I'd like to go back and talk a little bit about some of the other people involved in the personalities. One is Sam Shoemaker. Sam Shoemaker was, I don't think he was the greatest life changer that I ever saw, but he was one of the best. Now you have to remember that you say, what did the Oxford group have to offer you? What was it? If it didn't talk about alcohol, what did they talk about? The Oxford group was basically an evangelistic movement. That is, we had a tremendous amount of people come from the churches who had never found an experience of Christ or God in their life, and this was not a hallelujah, praise the Lord type of thing. It was not a sanctimonious group. It was a very practical, honest, laughable. We had a lot of fun at these meetings. People telling funny stories about themselves of how what they had done and how God had brought something new into their life. But this was the atmosphere that you got. Sam was very direct. For instance, if you would go home from a meeting like we're going to have here over the weekend, the first thing Sam would say to you, what did you see new for yourself you hadn't seen before? He was always looking for that next step in a person's life. He always used to say that there's no middle ground. You're either part of the disease or you're part of the cure. You have to, and you elect every day whether you're going to be part of the disease in the world or you're going to live the cure. And so Sam was always always trying to get people to see new steps for you. I remember he used to come to our home in Frederick, and we were just raising a family then. And he would say to my wife, I presume you're changing people every day. Oh, yes, she said, some of them I change twice a day. And he said, I don't mean the babies. He said, he says, so I remember Sam had a home down there in Baltimore. And when he retired, he came there to live. So I'm a member of the Methodist Church, so we asked Sam to come in as a guest speaker one day. So he came in, and Sam had a habit of, when the sermon was over, he always went to the door, and some of you may have his book. His wife wrote a book, Helen wrote a book called He Stands at the Door. And this is Sam's technique. It was his way of personalizing his sermon. He didn't say, how do you do? It's a nice day. And he always said something very pertinent, very deep to these people. And when he just finished his sermon there on that day, and he was out standing at the door, and one of our little old ladies went out, and she said, Dr. Shoemaker, she said, I want to tell you how much I enjoyed your sermon today. He said, in a very gruff voice, you're not supposed to enjoy it. You're supposed to get out there and do something about it. Well, this poor old lady looked like someone had thrown a bucket of water on her. She certainly had never had a minister talk to her like that. But if you knew Sam, that was Sam. And I can visualize a lot of the early give and take that went on in New York between Bill and Sam. There was another fellow, we talked about life changes, a fellow by the name of Cleve Hicks. I guess Cleve, in Oxford group days, he was the greatest life changer that I've ever seen in my life. In those days, we had hotels. We had elevator boys running the elevators. You didn't have a push button type of thing then. And I've been on elevators that we go to the 4th or 5th floor, and this fellow Hicks was talking to the elevator boy about the deepest things in his life. And not in a sanctimonious way at all, but a very practical down there. He knew just how to go into a fellow's life and what to say. So I said to a friend of mine, I said, this guy is a great life changer. But he's a nice, jovial fellow. He has a good personality. And I said, he likes people. And I said, he's a natural life changer. But my friend said, yeah, but he wasn't like that always. He said, I was his roommate in prep school. And he said, he was the most disliked guy on the campus. He said he was arrogant. He was selfish. He was self-centered. He said it was only when God came into his life through the Oxford group that they changed it, and tremendous change came. This guy lived. He was full-time volunteer with Bookman, no pay. He lived out of a suitcase. In those days, Bookman had a mobile force of between 150 and 200 young, unmarried people, mostly men. There were very few women in the group then, in this mobile group. But that group was so geared that at the drop of a hat, he could move them into a trouble spot in the world tomorrow. And it was a very effective way of doing it. He took this group into South Africa, and not all of those. There were mostly Oxford group students that he was working with in 1928. He took them into South Africa to deal with the same problems that they're dealing with down there now. These people went in there on quite a different basis. They went in simply telling their stories of how God had come into their life and changed them personally, and what he had taken out, and the purpose he'd given for their life. And that was the reason they were coming. This is quite different. People were telling them quite different, the things they ought to be doing in order to straighten up their affairs. But here was a group coming, asking nothing, simply telling them how they themselves had changed. Well, this idea became so popular that people began looking them up. And they were traveling in railroad cars. Well, the porter on the cars got tired of directing people to where these fellows were, so he wrote Oxford Group on the doors of the car, and that's the way the name Oxford Group came into being. Before then, it was called the First Century Christian Fellowship. Oxford Group, 1928 till 1938, and then mild rearmament from then on. So this fellow Hicks, Cleve Hicks, was a part of that mobile group. He could move. Of course, he lived out of his suitcase, and he could go anywhere at a moment's notice. He used to. I had moved to Baltimore in the meantime, and he used to come down there to spend the weekends. And he was a great walker. He used to walk, but near the end, he just wanted to sit in a chair. 45 years old, this guy was. 45 years. He just wanted to rest. He died shortly after that heart attack because he just gave himself. And that's the way many of these people gave themselves. We would have a meeting like we're having here tonight. Well, the meeting would only start when this was over, because then you would sit down personally and talk to people about their life. And that is the way the change came about. You sit down, you take this person through. We had a regular life-changing program called the 5 C's. You hear it referred to in some of the literature now, but the one was confidence. The next was confession. The next was conviction, and then conversion, and then continuance. And the way that worked was that listen, am I taking much time here? The way this worked was that no one would listen to you if they don't know you or have confidence in you or something. So there's no use talking to people about something until you gain their confidence. So that's where confidence comes in. And the next is confession, where you share with the person what God has taken out of your life, the things He's given you, the purpose, a new dynamic that He's given to you. Then the next one is conviction. That brings conviction in the life of another person. I'll tell you more about that tomorrow. And then the next one is conversion. That's where he became converted. And the fifth one is continuance, and that is the roughest one of all. These aren't absolute. Obsolete. They're still here today, and that's what we ought to be using with people. We can talk more about that, but continuance is the roughest one, because you don't take a new baby and put it out on the doorstep and expect it to live. No, you keep it in the house. You keep it warm. You clothe it. You bathe it. You feed it. You give it love. You give it care, and you help that newborn physical baby to grow. And that's the same thing that happens or should happen in a spiritual life. It's when a person makes a decision. They're going to need fellowship. They're going to need Bible study. They're going to need prayer. They're going to need love, care, devotion, and all that sort of thing that you as a person can give them. And that is a problem because many people don't want to go through this deal. Now, I lost my train of thought here for a moment. But unless we can do this, that person sort of dies on the vine. Now, I'll tell you how this works practically. You take a fellow like Billy Graham or any of the evangelists. They go and they have a meeting. Hundreds of people come up there. They hear something inspired. They want to find something new. They want to make a new start in their life, and they come up. And Billy Graham knows that possibly that's the last time he'll see those people because he can't stay in that town and continue that process of helping him to grow spiritually. So then, where did they come from, these people? Most of them came from the local churches. Well, where do they go back to then? They go back to the local churches. Well, if they weren't finding something new in the churches then that they found here, how are they going to, who's going to support this new decision in their life as they go back? See, because other people don't know about this. So that's the reason the fifth C is so very, very difficult. But But those are that's what we were taught as a procedure. And we used to have a saying that if you're not winning, you're sinning. I think that could be interpreted too in our AA program. I'm just telling you how it was back then. Now you have to relate how it is now. You see the deal. But my experience is I'm going to. You see, I have access. I go to. Maybe I'm more gifted. I'm given better advantages, let's say, than you all maybe. Because, see, in my capacity, what do you call me?
Distinguished.
Yes. I have access to NAs. I go to GAs, and I go to 12-step programs, and you won't believe what they're doing in some of these 12-step programs. I went to a 12-step program, and they asked me to come in as a speaker. So they said that they have the way they start, they go around the room and say, what are you abstaining from? So when they come to me, I said, I'm abstaining from everything. And so I have advantage, you see, of seeing how all the others operate here. So let me see once. I have to think what I was going to say to you here. Put me on the track here. What was I talking about here?
We're making the transition to the continuance in the Oxford group.
Yeah. Well, so the I can hear that.
What you were hearing in the 12-step meetings compared to the Oxford.
Oh yeah, I might tell you that.
Okay.
The one. So I was amazed, because coming out of the Oxford group, this one woman said that she was abstaining from a bad temper, and another one was overeating. And one of them was even abstaining from tight clothes. She had a tendency to wear tight clothes to attract people's attention. So she had a conviction that was wrong, and so they wanted to get away from that. So they were abstaining from everything. But let me go back to the Sam Shoemaker and the fifth step. I was with Sam at an Easter service one time in the National Cathedral in Washington. And we had a church meeting, and then we went into a parish hall meeting, informal meeting. A lot of people came in, a lot of ministers came in. So one of the ministers said, in an informal gathering, he said, Dr. Shoemaker, he said, why don't you insist that your converts, as he called them, go back into their churches? And Sam said, well, I wasn't conscious that we weren't sending them back in the churches. But he said, from a realistic standpoint, he said, you have to understand that sometimes it's like putting a live chicken under a dead hen. And this minister said, yes. He said, I see what you mean. You see, most people in churches, and I think it's I see it in the AA program too, is that most people never get beyond the point, or never get beyond the experience of their own conversion. Now, what I mean by that is that their conversion is good, it's meaningful, there's nothing wrong with the thing, but their conversion doesn't become multiplied into the life of another person. There's no evangelistic outreach. 90% of the people that I see in AA meetings around my area they go to keep sober only. There's no outreach. There's no personal outreach of them into the life of other people. Did I tell you about the Bill and the converts he had when he first started, when he went out?
No, not yet.
Bill worked with about 50 alcoholics for about 6 months when he first went on his own with the AA movement. And at the end of 6 months, there wasn't one of those people any different. And he was very discouraged. He was going to quit. But Lois said, look, Sam, he said, you got to remember, Bill, look, Bill, he said, you got to remember that not once during those 6 months did you yourself want to drink. And he said, you're right. So responsibility for other people became the keynote, and still is today, of the AA movement. My experience in the early AA movement is that these people were so fervent. They would go any time of the day or night, no matter. If someone was in need, they would go and help that. But I don't see that happening now. I don't hear of it happening. Maybe it is, but I don't hear of this thing. But it was that outreach for people that was a carryover from the Oxford group. Now, I've been in this thing since 1935, as I told you, and I see lots of changes, both in the model rearmament program and in the AA program. In the model rearmament program, when we switched from the Oxford group to model rearmament, the emphasis then, it was still an evangelistic movement, but basically we were dealing with the needs of people. That is, it became what they termed an ideology, where you were dealing with the people, with the cause and effect, dealing with the people who caused a certain thing to bring about another effect. Bookman's idea was always new men, new nations, a new world. He never varied from that. He used to say that everyone wants to see the other fellow different, and every nation wants to see the other nation different. But everyone and every nation is waiting for the other fellow and the other nation to begin. That if you want an answer in the world today, the best place to start is with yourself and with your own nation. See, we were an example of this is that people talk about changing the world, and when you think of changing the world, you think of what's happening in Bosnia or Timbuktu or someplace not around. But what is your world? Your world are the people that you contact, the people that you touch. That is your world. So if you're not being effective with the people in that world that you live in, what are you going to do for the people in Bosnia around? So this thing is the very thing. See, we used to have slogans like, crows are black the world over. Meaning that we're not different. I mean, we're all, when you talk about it, we never like to face it, but we're all, every one of us, we're all dirty people. It's a wonder how God puts up with us. And this is the thing, yeah. So what the Oxford group was to get people to recognize these things by throwing 4 standards out at them. And that's the way, I remember we had a cartoon that it showed a fellow coming back from a fishing expedition. He had his fishing poles, but he didn't have any fish. And the caption underneath said, I didn't get any fish, but I influenced a lot of them. Often people settle for influencing people. I influenced a fellow. Let's see, what were some of the other things? One was that you can't keep the birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from building nests in your hair. And that was one that we used a lot. And if Bookman brought anything new to the Christian faith, and there was a tremendous difference in those days. It was quite a difference between the Oxford group people and so-called church people in those days. Amazing. But all those people came out of the churches. It was a very aristocratic movement. People asked me what it was like and all that sort of thing. And it was quite different than what we do. Well, not quite different, but we didn't have the the uniformity, I guess, that we have in the AA meetings today. You always start your meeting, with certain things, and we didn't do that. In those days, we had a leader, and that person would call on different people to witness to what was happening in their life, what God had taken out of their life. And out of this then came the conviction of which made it. You established the atmosphere in which the later meetings took place, where the individual sitting down talking to another person would take place, and the fellow would be pretty much primed by that time, and that's the way the movement was carried on. It was a one-on-one basis. And that's the way it went. I was thinking also there were certain mechanics that when Bookman brought four things. Really two things to the Christian faith. He brought the four standards, which they refer to in the big book, and which we don't talk about enough now, but the four standards. And I think these four standards should be the criteria by getting into your fourth step that you have, because you talk about taking an inventory, a personal inventory. Well, what do you take a personal inventory on? Certainly you're going to be not going to be too hard on yourself, and you're going to be as easy as you can. So I think the four standards ought to be in there. Bookman brought four standards to us. These were biblical, taken from Christ's Sermon on the Mount. And the other thing he brought, that God had a plan for your life. And if you listen to the deepest thing in your heart, you'll know what that plan is based on those four standards. Another thing he was strong on was restitution. Very, very strong on restitution. I didn't know too much about restitution, but I couldn't understand why he was so strong on it. But later on, I found out why he was strong on it. Now, I always thought the restitution was something that you took, like sponging your own slate clean and getting good, clean feeling inside. Yeah, it's that, sure. But the big thing is what it does for the other person. I was telling someone here this evening, the simplest form of restitution I can think of is that every one of us in this room has had this experience. We've been at loggerheads with someone, and we've gone back to that person and said, look, so-and-so, I'm sorry what I said to you the other day. I really didn't mean that. Invariably, this person will say, well, look, it wasn't all your fault. I had a part in it. So what was a barrier between you two now goes into a horizontal bridge. There's a new relationship been established between you and that person. Something that was not there before. And all of you have experienced this. There's something new born between you and that other person. Something you can follow up on and go deeper and think. That is the simplest form of restitution I can think of. The Bookman was very strong on restitution, going back and giving amends for something that you had done wrong, and based on what has been revealed to you in quiet times, basing your life on those four standards, and that's all really Bookman brought. We proceeded on the basis of that. So this was a life-changing program. Bookman always said, new men, new nation, and new world. He said you can vote the Democrats in and the Republicans out, and vice versa. But unless you deal with the basic motives of men, you're always going to end up with the same thing. And that's exactly what we have. Unless you deal with the things that affect people's lives and change these things, let God change these things, you're always going to end up with the same story. Now, I'll tell you a lot of restitution stories tomorrow when I tell my own personal stories, and I have what to me was a classic, because it really brought me to my knees in a big way when I know what happened. But restitution was one of the things. So we're talking about 4 standards. We're talking about guidance of God, quiet times, and we're talking about restitution. Now those are the things that stand out to me as the other people may have seen other things, but those I think were the essential things that Bookman brought in. These were the things that Bill, Sam Shoemaker, Dr. Bob tried to convey into the 4 standards. I mean, into the 12 steps. Now, if you go into the 12 steps, everything that I've said here is in there. If you draw them out, you see they're there. But I think they need to be more legible, more tangible, more something that they just jump out at you and this sort of thing. Because what I see happening is there's been a deterioration in the AA movement. There's been a deterioration in moral rearmament movement, because I don't see people now in the moral rearmament moving sitting down with people as we did in the Oxford Group days and on a personal change basis, taking them through the 4 standards. They would take us through the 4 standards just like you take people through the 12 steps. And I could never understand why the difference between the first step and the second is but you admit that you have a problem you can't solve, and yet that God has given you an answer, yet you can't bring yourself to believe in God. I mean, in the early day, I had that experience with a lot of people. They never got past the second step. And where you can take an Oxford Group person and go through the 12 steps without any problem at all. But what I'm afraid of now, and I've shared this with the hierarchy of the moral rearmament movement, is that people come into a meeting like this, and they go away as a fisherman. They go away influenced, and the first thing you know, they are on the fringes of the moral rearmament movement. They're coming into meetings, and but they've never made that basic decision in their life. But they consider themselves a part of the MRA program, and so the thing is that if they never got taken through the steps, how are they going to generate something new in someone else's life on the same basis? You see, so it's generation after generation that gets watered down. You see what I'm saying? And I think that could be happening in the AA movement too. We could be selling our heritage for a mess of porridge, as I like to put it. Is that we're selling the thing cheap. See, our program is not to get people into AA movement. Our program is to get God in charge of people's lives. That's what we want to do, you see. And so many times we try to get people in churches or into a movement or something without getting the principle of that movement or the thing into the motivating force of that person. And so I don't know, Wally, I talk a lot here. I have a habit of they said I have a habit of having diarrhea of the mouth and a constipation of ideas. But I don't know if anyone has any question I'd be very happy to answer anything I could. Yeah.
What are the 4 standards?
The 4 standards. Oh, did I miss that? 4 standards is one is absolute honesty. The next one is absolute purity. The next one is absolute love. And the next one is absolute unselfishness. No, selfishness is the third. I'm sorry. Love is the last. Those are the 4. Now, when I met this group, I didn't have any problem with honesty at all. That wasn't my problem. My problem was with the absolute part of honesty, you see. And that's where I hit the skids, you know. And so at a meeting just last week, a guy came up to me. We were talking about this. He said, "What is absolute purity?" So that's it. So that is the next morning in my guidance, God said to me, "You let that fellow down. You didn't give him the real answer." You see, and I wasn't sharp enough with him, and I didn't get. I don't know what. I mean, I never have a chance. You see, often God only gives us one chance with these people. Sometimes you don't get a second chance. So the thing is to give the people your deepest message when you have the opportunity. Just last night, I sat in a Red Line Inn with a family from Connecticut. Two people, and they were sitting there. I went in and sat down in the lobby waiting for dinner, and so we got to talking, and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going up to East Dorset to Bill Wilson's birthplace." And I said, "Do you know Bill Wilson? Are you here, Bill? The fellow who started the AA movement?" "Yeah," he said, "I've heard of it and everything." So I said, "Well, let me tell you some story about Bill." So I start with Bill Wilson, and the first thing you know, I'm into my personal story with him, you see, and they were absolutely fascinated with the stories and the thing I told them. So I guess I influenced them, I think, last night. I didn't change anything last night, I don't think, but no one made a decision with me, but I did influence them a deal. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I also now wonder if you do have a definition for absolute purity.
Well,
definition for absolute purity.
I think Susan Wesley gave the best definition. I guess she was telling her. You see, it's another. I have mentioned a word that we never hear a lot about now is sin. You see, I never hear that word anymore. Sin. You see, it's made up of three S-I-N. Now, if you take that letter I, the big I out of that, you don't have a letter anymore. You don't have a word anymore. See, so we can relate to that, how to take that I out of the thing. So, Susan said to John, I mean, this is not verbatim, but she said that she was giving a definition of sin, which is the opposite of absolute purity. She said that, whatever takes off your relish for spiritual things, or let's see, I think she said the goodness of your heart. They say, in short, whatever gives you, whenever your body takes authority over your mind, that thing to you is sin, no matter how innocent it may seem in itself. You see, sin, absolute purity may be, I don't know, the first thing people think about when you do that, we always think about sex, you see. Well, absolute purity means different for a single person than it does for a married person. Now, the Bible is very clear on that. There's single person is abstinence, and which is very difficult for people right now with all of the mechanical means of protection and all this thing. But purity goes much beyond that. It's the things you think and say and do. I told this fellow, I said, if you could you share these things with your mother? And I was trying to bring something practical into his life, but I know that this was his problem. But this is the place where God comes into your life, and often it is impossible to abstain from acts of impurity, but Christ can give you the power for that. And if you go deeper in the thing, He gives us this power. It's more than that. It's the purity of our thinking, of our relationship, our hates and our greeds, and there are many things involved in absolute purity, and it's hard to give definite criteria for it. But this is where guidance comes. This is where quiet times comes in. This is a relationship with God comes in. Now, all through the Bible, there's story, their example after example, all the scriptures refer to God speaking to people, God talking to people. And this discourse that you're going to see is going to be very helpful tomorrow, because Bishop Sheen said it's ridiculous to ring God's doorbell in prayer and then run away. Bookman used to say you should write the thoughts down that come. He used to say that the strongest memory is weaker than the palest ink. And it's just a practical reason for writing thoughts down, so that your mind is ready for the next one. And also you can check these off at the end of the day to see if you've followed all the thoughts. But the big thing is to have a sharing partner where you share these thoughts with. I think you call them sponsors, don't you, Nettie? And where you can, because these are important things, that you interpret these things right in your life, and guidance is, I think, one of the most important things in the Christian life. You see, so many people, to me, think that God, our life is like a chessboard, and we pray for something. And God said, okay, you've been a good fellow, I'll do that. So he moves that person around, and moves that piece, they call it a piece, into a position that God doesn't operate like that. God operates through our lives. He uses our lives to touch other people. We're the instruments he uses. We say, make us an instrument of yours. Well, I don't think we know what we're talking about when we say that, because he's trying to make us instruments, and he wants to talk to us. He wants Henry Drummond was a great theologian. He died in 1891, I think. Very concise person. He wrote a number of essays or sermons, and he talks about God's plan for our life in there. And that's way back in the 1800s he was talking about this. He said, just think that God, the importance of this, he said, God has a plan for your life. It isn't for anyone else. Your life and yours only. And that God can talk to you, and he doesn't, his whispers are not for anyone else, but just for you. And the things that he wants you to do, the things he has for you to do. And the only way you're going to know that is listen for this. And to me, it's a very practical way. When he talked to me about listening, first I said, I thought they were crazy. I didn't know how God could talk to me, but so they had what they called a quiet time, and so they had a movie they were going to show at this meeting where I was too, and they couldn't get the movie to get started. So he said, well, we're going to have the meeting, and then we'll go back and have a quiet time. And so we had the meeting, then we had the quiet time, and this fellow who was running the movie, he said after the quiet time, he said, I just had guidance. He said, what was wrong with the movie? And he went over and pressed a button, and it went right off. And I said, oh, man. So it was at the same meeting. I had my first quiet time. And something had happened 8 years before that. I had worked for a company, and they'd borrowed a car from another company, and I was running that car. I went down to the University of Maryland one Saturday afternoon to a football game, got drunk on the way down, hit another car, didn't stop, came back, and I fixed my car up and lied out of it. I got the fellow who ran the garage to say I'd never had the car out, and the thing was smoothed over. I never would have thought of that humanly. I'll guarantee you, I never would have thought of that. That was the first thing that came into my mind, was to go back and restore for that car, a restitution. And so some things you can't restore for, but there are many things that we can. And when that restitution is the thing that opens the door for other. So I went back and straightened up for that. But that didn't change a whole lot of lives, but the thing it did change my life, I'll guarantee you, because it made a Christian, quotation out of me, as far as guidance was concerned. Because then I realized there was something to this guidance, and that God could speak to you if you would let him. And the Bible's full of references to God speaking to people and God listening. But I don't know, it never came into being until Bookman made it a policy. And he said we ought to be listening. You know, there used to be a cartoon we had a person with big ears said you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you ought to listen twice as much as you talk. So I'm going to do that.
Okay. Is that it? All right.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.